Thrilled once again to have you joining us on the More People podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Fitzmaurice, joined today by my friend, Suneel Appan. Sunny, thanks for joining us. A bit of background, bio, short one on how you get to be here today, your career journey to date.
It's 2009 since I finished university, so 15 years or so. Potted history around the food sector, food manufacturing, into a bit of retail work, and then more recently into the world of anaerobic digestion. AD is my full-time role, so joined a company called Future Biogas at the start of 2024. So that's kind of full-time work, and then side activities are as a NED or non-exec director for the Association for Decentralised Energy, the ADE for short.
Yep.
But also a governor for Inspire Education Group, a local group of colleges and university in Peterborough and Stamford.
So you're a product and an outstanding example of the ABF British Sugar machine and the grad programme.
That's right.
Through there for the first 12 years?
Yeah, so started with British Sugar, learned how to make sugar in a sugar factory in the UK, lived in over towards Norwich and then up in Nottingham near Newark, settled down in Peterborough and finally in Stamford, and worked kind of across major projects into control systems, and then jumped into where I still am today, the energy sector.
So how did the trading, the buying and selling of energy, where did that come from? I'm guessing that the demands in sugar refineries for energy are very, very high. So there's a big enough need to have a team devoted to it. How did you get into that team?
So that was my kind of first real kind of twist in my career development away from engineering, technical projects into the world of procurement. A very generous boss and team leader took a punt on me and said, this guy is sensible enough, we'll give him a go. And I explored the world of the energy sector, principally procurement of new supply contracts, but also doing some export sales agreements. And then lastly, that commodity risk exposure. So thinking about natural gas, thinking about electricity, but also solid fuels and carbon dioxide certificates.
This is buying some of it on contract, trading some of it, looking at suppliers, looking at different sources of where that comes from.
It was a kind of classic procurement role mixed in with commodity risk, which then morphed into thinking about energy efficiency and energy reduction. And part of that role wasn't just British Sugar; it was the broader Associated British Foods Group, and involved companies like Primark, brands like Kingsmill. Household names, but when you aggregate all of that energy demand together, you end up with quite a big portfolio.
People always forget the Primark bit, don't they, within ABF?
Big part of the business.
Yeah.
But interesting, something very different with a business unit in its own right with very different demands to some of the other food manufacturing organisations. That procurement risk role led me ultimately into running that team across all of the different businesses in the UK and into parts of Europe. And then after kind of coming to the end of that role, jumped back into British Sugar and spent about 12 months investigating decarbonisation options for sugar factories in the UK.
Did you live and work there through all of the energy crisis? We've had a few over the last half a dozen years. The world's been a challenging place.
Yeah, after a fairly benign period from a market pricing perspective, the Beast from the East was one that came along.
Forgot about that.
Surprised everyone. And then more recently, market turmoil through conflict has presented different challenges, both from a energy pricing perspective, but more into security of supply.
Yeah.
That gives me a great segue into finishing up with ABF. I had a little patch in the middle where I had a go at trying to build part of a house, still ongoing, and ended up at Future Biogas. And on that point of security supply, it is a domestically developed energy source that can help corporates decarbonise, whether it's commercial operations, industrial activity, or possibly that on an equivalent basis into households.
Yeah. So I guess AD has become increasingly, it feels like, more well known and well understood by people, either because there's been some funding or there's been an appetite to control their own supply chain a bit better, given the challenges externally and the decarbonisation piece. AD, I think, therefore, is still on the to-do list for lots of people to be better at it and to understand the complexities of it. We've talked on this podcast before about circular farming and the nature of controlling the digestate and the efficiencies of them, which we're not going to get into now. How much of it is driving the agenda when it comes to energy or decarbonisation? Is it always a bit of both?
In terms of organisations having it on the to-do list, I guess there's a few things to mention. We started what we're doing now 15 years ago, so it's not new.
Yeah.
It's well established, it's understood in the UK. It delivers about 1% of the UK gas network already. In terms of it being on people's to-do list, there are already somewhere between, I think it's 500 and 1,000 AD sites in the UK. So again, well-established technology that lots of different people are operating. And then in terms of where it stands for people on a decarbonisation pathway or roadmap, what we're able to do is provide a green solution to manufacturing heat requirements, high heat demands, or into premises which are not necessarily suitable for some other technologies in the renewable space.
So is the growth in this area going to come, in your opinion, from farms and food businesses, manufacturing sites having an AD plant of their own on site, or is it going to be more AD specific companies that are there for the sake of energy and heat and decarbonisation?
The on-farm stuff will continue. It's a sensible part of that of the sector.
Yeah.
And there's a mixture of waste and residues, and what we do, purpose-grown energy crops. If you take our business model, a key part is the fact that we're making the most of the existing gas network. We've got this fantastic infrastructure which moves molecules of gas all across the UK, and what we're doing is injecting green ones in as opposed to fossil ones. That bit will be there to help whether it's small, medium or large organisations on their decarbonisation path, and doing so in the same way that the electricity sector has already succeeded and will continue towards Clean Power 2030 and all of those other objectives that have been recently announced and reinforced, like a power purchase agreement. We are building a marketplace for the gas purchase agreement, specifically a green gas purchase agreement.
Is there a controversy around growing crops specifically for AD as opposed to AD plants purely alleviating waste?
Utilising all of the waste generated in the UK is something we need to get right. Ultimately, what we need to be doing is generating less waste. So if you put that waste concept to one side, and then you're into food versus fuel, that's a question that's often raised as part of our discussions with, whether it's a small business or a large corporate. They've got a sustainability team or a ESG team who are interested in the provenance of the feedstock that's going in. Our story's really clear. We've built these relationships with 400 farmers across the UK, predominantly the eastern part of the UK, the East Midlands and East Anglia, helping them to decarbonise the farm by encouraging this rotation in crop growing. So we can introduce maize predominantly, but there are a range of other crops, but it's about 70% maize into their cycle. We'll typically seek for them to grow 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 seasons, but sometimes as often as 1 in 3. And as part of doing that, we return that digestate you mentioned already back onto the farm, which helps to improve soil health, soil carbon, but also gives them that diversified source of revenue. And it, over time, will increase yields, not only from our crops that we're seeking for them to grow, but also for the other crops in their chosen rotation. It will be wheat, but it could also be beans and peas and oats and sugar beet.
So we've just turned off, as we're filming this, recently we've turned off the last coal-fired power station. It feels like, to me, as a layperson in this field, it feels like as an island nation, we should have more independence. We should be able to have more independence on where our energy is sourced from. Obviously, renewables and the wind and the solar and everything else is going up and up.
The fundamentals are ultimately a reduction in gas demand over time as we approach 2050. So the market size will shrink quite dramatically, we expect. Our ambition as an organisation is to grow from our existing half a terawatt hour, if that unit of measure means anything to you, up to 3 terawatt hours. That's a big move for us. There are other operators in the marketplace seeking to do the same. There are some other countries in Europe, I think, delivering something like 50% of their gas demands through green gas. Will the UK get there? Let's see. We will need some favourable policy changes with respect to some very specific pieces of legislation, which have some great acronyms. But with that in time, with the ambition of major corporates to decarbonise whether it's their office, their research park, or their manufacturing facility, we can see a real growth in the sector.
Good. Speaking acronyms, you also wear other hats, as you've alluded to already, as a NED for ADE, and you're also involved as a governor for something called Inspire.
Almost. Inspire is one of the 3 words. Inspire Education Group,
Okay.
IEG. So we'll pick that one up first. Clues in the title. Stanford College, just up the road from here, but also Peterborough College and University Centre Peterborough, supporting, enabling, developing 10,000 students a year with close to 1,500 staff. So a real massive institution and something very different. Introduced to it by a good friend who I play touch rugby with on a Tuesday every week, who could see that I was looking for a kind of another twist in my personal development, career development activities. And it is a real insight into governing, steering the ship of an organisation which is of quite a different size to my other NED hat with the ADE, which is less than 1% by revenue in terms of scale. So it's a really great opportunity to see education is interesting. Don't necessarily want to be a teacher, but the sector and the development of young people is important to all of us in the long run.
Yeah, it's a well-trodden conversation on this podcast and in our office. The dinners that we host, the events we attend, the speeches we give, the dearth of talent, the shortage of people. What are we doing to attract more people into this industry when perhaps they don't know it as well as they might know other things?
And that's been really fascinating for me, joining that group over the past just over a year. It's seeing the breadth of activity they're up to. You just kind of take it for granted, and it's all happening less than 5 minutes walk from my house.
Yeah.
Here in Stamford, and it's only 20 minutes down the road into Peterborough.
So you're super passionate, obviously, clearly, about the sector, and it's served you well thus far. If you were talking to a 16-year-old who wasn't sure which direction they were going to go into, why would you recommend a career in this space, in your space?
So the space I'm in now, or the sector I'm in now, energy, specifically renewables, I think it's fairly clear to all that there's a real growth ambition, a real growth opportunity within this environment over the next 20, 30, a career's worth of time. There are new innovations, new opportunities to get in right at the start of the development of a new technology or an idea or business. And then there are the really well-established big utility players that you can go and be part of. My background and where I've ended up now, there is a real difference between working in an organisation of 150,000 people, now working in one with 150 people. I bet it's even different again, working as one of 15 or perhaps starting your own. So I'd really encourage people to explore those options and have a go. If there's a young person out there passionate about trying to explore what pathway they want to follow, happy to have a conversation. And I'm sure you do the same. There's lots of other people out there who are willing to give their time in that way to someone who shows an interest, someone who's a bit proactive about that kind of thing. And then on both parts, listening. Often it's asking a good question.
Well, hopefully we've done that today. Thanks, Sunny.